transient stress. Hi, hola, merhaba. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Noor, and today we're gonna talk about borderline personality disorder, or BPD. So what is borderline personality disorder? How does it manifest? What are the 9 criteria for diagnosis? And finally, what is my experience with borderline personality disorder? Borderline personality disorder is marked by a pervasive pattern of instability in emotions, interpersonal relationships, and self-image, as well as impulsivity beginning in early adulthood and present in several contexts. There are a total of 9 criteria for borderline personality disorder, and you need to have at least 5 in order to be diagnosed. So what are the 9 criteria? 1. Fear of abandonment. What is fear of abandonment? Fear of abandonment is characterized by frantic and extreme efforts to avoid real or imagined separation, abandonment, rejection, or betrayal. 2. A pattern of unstable interpersonal relationships. This is characterized by intense relationships that are really roller coastery and usually characterized by extreme relationships that go from idealization to devaluation. 3. Identity disturbance, with markedly or persistently unstable sense of self, self-image, and identity. 4. At least 2 impulsive, risky, and/or self-damaging behaviors. Examples include binge eating, risky sex, risky driving, excessive spending, substance abuse, self-sabotage, and ruining positive relationships. 5. Suicidal behavior or self-injury. This includes both actions and threats. 6. Unstable emotions. This means roller coastery emotions. Again, notice there's a lot of instability in borderline personality disorder. This is usually characterized by unstable moods or mood swings that can last for a few hours up to very, very rarely a few days. 7. Ongoing chronic feelings of emptiness. This could be sadness, emptiness, worthlessness, just really like a hole in you type of feeling. 8. Inappropriate or intense anger usually includes frequent loss of temper, fights, sarcasm, bitterness, getting into physical fights, throwing things, etc. 9. Transient stress-related paranoia, loss of contact with reality, or dissociation. So like I said, there are 9 criteria, but you only need to meet 5. Personally, I meet all 9 or have at some points in my life, but the things I struggle with the most personally are instability in terms of both my relationships and my emotions, loss of identity or identity disturbance, and suicidality. So what are some terms that you should know when it comes to borderline personality disorder? The first term you should know is splitting. So what is splitting? Splitting is going from idealization to devaluation, from this person is good or this object is good to this object is bad or this person is bad, to this is great to this is absolutely terrible and cruel. The second term you should know when it comes to borderline personality disorder is dissociation. Dissociation is disconnecting from one's thoughts, memories, feelings, sense of self, or identity. There are several symptoms that you can experience when you're dissociating. These include being disconnected from self or the world around you, having this feeling that you're outside of your body and you're floating above. A lot of people describe it as like watching over themselves as their body just kind of acts on its own. Forgetting certain time periods, events, or personal information. Uncertainty about who you are. Having multiple distinct identities. Feeling little to no physical pain. What are other terms you should know when it comes to borderline personality disorder? Favorite person. So what is a favorite person? A favorite person is a borderline person's favorite person. It is the person that they get their self-worth and value from. It is someone who they become really attached to. This person becomes their all, both their comfort and their devotion. It is really hard to be a borderline's favorite person. It is a lot of pressure. It is really hard for a borderline to have a favorite person. It is a very intense relationship. So if you're someone, I understand that it's really hard, but be patient with them if you can. It's just as hard for them as it is overwhelming for you. The other thing that you should know about borderline personality disorder is that we're all or nothing thinkers or black and white thinkers, meaning that we think things are all good and all bad. We don't have space for gray area. We don't see gray areas. We don't see people or objects or events as being good and bad or being mediocre. We live in extremes. So we live in the good, all bad, all or nothing spaces. People with borderline personality disorder often have other disorders and or mental illnesses in addition to borderline personality disorder. This is called comorbidity. So the majority of people with borderline personality disorder are comorbid with depression. This is about 60 to 70%. 35% are comorbid with substance abuse. 25% are comorbid with narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. This is usually more common in men. 15% are comorbid with bipolar disorder, like me. And 55 to 85% are comorbid with self-injury, depending on the type of self-injury. So a little bit of myths and misconceptions about borderline personality disorder that I often hear that are not true are that borderline people are more manipulative, or they are This is not necessarily true. Obviously, are there borderline people who are manipulative? Yes, everyone can be manipulative. However, it's not a criteria for borderline personality disorder. You do not have to be manipulative in order to be borderline. Most people with borderline are not manipulative, in fact, and most of their actions are unconscious and unintentional. Another thing I hear about borderline personality disorder just simply isn't true is that people with borderline personality disorder do not experience empathy. This is just not true. It's not a criteria, again, for borderline personality disorder. Some people with borderline personality disorder do struggle with seeing other people's points of views and understanding other people just because their own understanding of themselves is really hard for them. But that doesn't mean that people with borderline personality disorder do not experience empathy, as is shown by me, an example of a perfect empath. And lastly, last thing I hear about borderline personality disorder is that they're really dangerous. This is in fact not true. Most people with borderline personality disorder tend to take their anger and their pain out on themselves rather than other people. They tend to experience suicidality and self-injury. This doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Obviously, getting into physical fights is one of the things that people with borderline personality might do, but that doesn't make them a dangerous group as a whole. There's a lot of stigma surrounding borderline personality disorder. It is a really highly stigmatized and not well understood mental illness, even though so many people are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I think it's important to discuss that people with borderline personality disorder need your empathy and your support rather than your
judgment.
As someone with borderline personality disorder, I personally struggle with identity, instability, self-direction, and intimacy. Those are the things that I struggle with the most, in addition to suicidality. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was 21 after my first suicide attempt. It has been 7 years of me being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It's pretty usual for people to be diagnosed in adulthood, as borderline personality disorder cannot be diagnosed prior to adulthood since you're still developing a personality when you are a child. So most people are diagnosed in early adulthood. Personally, it has been a really hard journey for me when it comes to borderline personality disorder. I have lost a lot of people to the stigma and also to not understanding myself and not understanding how to manage my symptoms. The thing that has helped me most with borderline personality disorder has been therapy, particularly DBT, which is the most common form of treatment for borderline personality disorder. It is dialectical behavioral therapy, and it is a therapy about balancing opposing things together. There are 4 modules of DBT. These include mindfulness, emotional regulation, interpersonal skills, and distress tolerance. I think DBT is a really helpful tool when it comes to borderline personality disorder. I also think that when it comes to my own personal journey, talk therapy and trauma work has been really important in learning how to deal with borderline personality disorder and really manage my symptoms, because the more I became self-aware of my symptoms, the better I was able to manage them. And a lot of that went into realizing where a lot of these things came from in the first place and why I was acting the way I was acting, or why I would respond the way I responded. When it comes to borderline personality disorder, it is really hard to explain what is going on inside, but the reality is that when you're borderline, everything when you're living with borderline personality disorder is absolutely extreme. So being loved feels like mania, whereas like loving someone fills you with dread because you're afraid that they're gonna leave you. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of confusion. It's just really, really intense place to be at all times. Hello everybody, Editing Noor here. I just wanted to hop in because as I was editing the video, I got this really cool idea of like, hey, why don't you read that poem you wrote a few years back about borderline personality disorder? I think it would be really cool to read it to you because I think it really, really captures borderline personality disorder and my personal experience with it really, really well. I also think that this poem is one of the best descriptions of borderline personality disorder that I've seen out there. And I'm not just saying that because I wrote it, though I did write it. I'm saying that because I personally feel like it describes my borderline perfectly, and I know that a lot of people with borderline personality disorder who have seen it have reached out to me and said the same thing. So let me read it to you and let me know down below if you have borderline personality disorder, if you feel like this poem captures your experience. The poem's called When You're Borderline, and it goes, when you're borderline, every impulse, thought, emotion, and interaction requires an action, reaction, and overreaction. Because when you're borderline, sadness feels borderline suicidal, and anger feels borderline homicidal. Because when you're borderline, being loved feels borderline manic, but loving someone fills me with borderline panic. Because when you're borderline, distance feels like abandonment, and losing someone feels like dying. Because when you're borderline, existence feels like abuse, and uncertainty feels like losing control. Because when you're borderline, happiness feels like unbearable euphoria, and normal feels like unbearable boredom. Because when you're borderline, emptiness is a constant state of being, and everything is a constant state of feeling. Now put all that into a single day, because that's what it feels like every day when you're borderline. I think this poem really captures the intensity of borderline personality disorder and my personal experience with it. Thank you so much for listening. Back to the original content. So what brings about borderline personality disorder? Well, it is the environment, genetics, and of course, trauma. Most people with borderline personality disorder have some sort of trauma in their past, and like people misinterpret the word trauma to be like this huge negative thing, when in reality trauma is something that you didn't adjust to, something that shocked your system and your mind and rewired the connections in your brain. So trauma can be very subjective and different from person to person. I think one of the hardest things about borderline personality disorder is just the intensity and stability really makes it hard for you to kind of build goals, have an identity. Everything is just so intense, and people with borderline personality disorder tend to be extremely sensitive to their surroundings, other people, and everything. And we tend to personally self-sabotage when things are good because we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's been a difficult journey being borderline, and I'm still learning every day how to manage my symptoms and how to become more self-aware and how to better understand how I can help myself and how others around me who love me can help me. But it's definitely really important to have a solid support network when it comes to borderline personality disorder. A therapist who understands you, probably a DBT therapist, would be really good. A trauma-informed therapist would be really good. Those are some things that have helped me, as well as constantly working on figuring out who I am, what I want, and what my goals are. Those are always changing, which makes it really hard for me because I have an unstable sense of identity. But the more I understand myself, the more solid they become. I hope this year's journey helps me better understand myself and find myself, and hopefully move forward and eliminate a little bit of the things that have been going on with borderline personality disorder when it comes to my relationships, my moods, my anger, and my suicidality. If you have any questions or would like to talk about borderline personality disorder, feel free to comment down below. Obviously, I'm no doctor or professional. I am simply someone with lived experience. I cannot diagnose you. I am not here to diagnose you. Please see a professional if you feel like you might have borderline personality disorder. Getting help is the first step towards getting better. Always feel free to reach out. I will put resources down below for borderline personality disorder, as well as suicide hotline and some other resources in the description. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!